Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S IAS. In the last couple of weeks, there have been two very important issues which have been highlighted in various news cycles. One was that the exports from India for the first time in this particular financial year have entered into a negative territory. Initially there was a slowdown. The exports, the rate of growth was declining, but for the first time in the month of September, the exports have entered into a negative territory. And second, the Ease of Doing Business report has given a thumbs up for various reforms which have been introduced by Government of India to promote ease of doing business in India, which has been reflected in the bump in the ranking which has been given to Indian economy from 100th rank to 77th rank. So on this particular background, the Government of India announced a very important set of reforms to promote the MSME sector. The name for these particular reforms which was used by Government of India was Support and Outreach Initiative for the MSME Sector. So in this particular video, we'll have a discussion as well as the analysis of these particular 12 reforms which have been announced by Government of India. So the points which broadly I'll be covering in this particular video will be: 1. Let's have an introduction to MSME. Let's have a brief understanding of what are the MSME units. Second, what is the importance of MSME sector in case of India? Third, what are the issues which are plaguing this particular sector? Fourth, what are the important reforms which were introduced by Government of India in the past to resolve some of the issues in the MSME sector? I'll remind you that a host of reforms have been introduced by Government of India, especially in the last couple of years. But I'll be picking up very important reforms which have been implemented to promote MSME sector. Apart from that, we will have a look at the 12 important initiatives announced by Government of India. While we are having a look at it, we will also analyze what is the importance of these particular announcements. And finally, how effective do we think these particular reforms will be in promoting MSME sector? And after discussing this, there itself, we will also give certain recommendations to Government of India. So let's start having a discussion on this particular topic. So begin with, let's have a look at what is MSME. MSME basically stands for Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. I'll repeat it. MSME stands for Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. If you want to look at the evolution of MSMEs, basically you'll have to go just after independence. There was a committee set up by Government of India, Karve Committee. Earlier, there was no concept of MSME. Rather, we use the term small scale industries. The small scale industries were defined based on the investment in the plant and machinery. So this particular committee, Karve Committee, recommended that the Government of India use its policies to promote this particular sector. And that is the precise reason you will see that in the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956, there is a huge bump or promotion of small scale industries. Over a period of time, this particular classification became redundant and very much complicated. That is the precise reason the Government of India replaced the concept of SSI with MSME, Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, with the passage of an act. Right now, all the guidelines with respect to regulation of MSME sector are present in this particular act. Now, on what basis the Government of India defines these different units, that is micro, small and medium enterprises? The classification in case of India has been based on the investment in plant and machinery. So how much should be the investment to be classified as a micro, small and medium enterprise? In case of a micro enterprise, that is within the manufacturing or production sector, if you make an investment of up to 25 lakh rupees, you will be classified as a micro enterprise. More than 25 lakh, up to 5 crore rupees, you will be classified as small, and more than 5, up to 10 crore rupees, you will be classified as medium enterprise. Whereas in case of services, an investment of up to 10 lakh rupees, you will be classified as micro. More than 10, up to 2 crore rupees, classified as a small, and more than 2 crore, up to 5 crore will be classified as medium enterprise. So based on the investment in plant and machinery, the Government of India classifies these particular units into micro, small and medium enterprises. Now, one of the drawback of this particular classification is that the experts are of the opinion that this particular limitation on the investment in plant and machinery will have a limiting impact on these particular micro, small and medium enterprises. Why? Let's say I own a micro enterprise and I want to expand the production so that the productivity in my factory will increase, the number of employments will increase, the contribution to growth will increase, the exports will also increase. But to achieve all of these particular objectives, I will have to invest in plant and machinery. And if I invest in plant and machinery, my threshold limit might cross more than 25 lakh rupees. And if I cross more than 25 lakh rupees, then I will lose the certification of a micro enterprise. And all the benefits that are attached to this particular certification of micro enterprise will also be lost by me. So the experts say that this kind of an definition will limit the growth in these particular enterprises and will disincentivize the growth of these particular enterprises. So basically, keeping in mind this particular argument, the government of India very recently has proposed that they want to change the definition of MSME sector. From the existing definition based on the investment in plant and machinery, government of India says we want to change it to a new definition wherein the MSME will be defined based on the revenues generated per annum. As per this particular proposal or the bill which has been proposed by government of India, if it is passed, the micro enterprises will be those enterprises wherein the revenue will be up to 5 crore rupees. And in case of a small, the revenues will be from 5 crore rupees to 75 crore rupees. And in case of a medium enterprises, it will be more than 75 crores to 250 crore rupees. So this is the proposal which has been given by Government of India to change the definition of MSME sector. What is the importance of this particular MSME sector? One, more than 65 million units are present in case of India, which have created employment of more than 120 million. After agriculture sector, it is said to be the largest employment generation sector in case of India. Second, MSME accounts for around 8% of GDP. That's a very huge number. Third, it accounts for more than 40% of the total exports from India. Fourth, it accounts for 45% of the contribution in the manufacturing sector. Apart from this, MSME sector will also play a very important role in promotion of indigenization and whether Make in India will be successful or not. Because please understand, out of the total manufacturing units which are working in case of India, majority of them, that is more than 90% of these particular units, are basically belonging to MSME sector. And the government of India wants to achieve huge production from the manufacturing sector, wants to ensure that contribution of manufacturing sector will increase to GDP. Not only that, it will also generate a huge number of jobs in the coming years. And if they want to achieve all these objectives under Make in India, they will have to promote and ensure that the MSME sector is thriving. So these are some of the points which focus on the importance of MSME sector in case of Indian economy. Next, let's have a look at what are the issues which are plaguing the MSME sector. One, the most important issue has been the issue of credit availability. In case of India, although the banks are supposed to give loans to the MSME sector, it has been found that various banks prefer to give a large value of a loan for large companies rather than giving small value of large loans to MSME sector. Why? In case of MSME sector, there is a volatility in the market. The revenue are not guaranteed. They are very much dependent on the external factors as well as internal factors. And the risk of giving loans to these MSME sectors will be very high. And not to forget the paperwork that will have to be done by the bank. Rather than this, they choose or they prefer to give large value of loans to large companies. That is a precise reason it has been seen that in the last couple of years, out of the total credit which is flowing to the MSME sector, the credit from the banking sector has reduced, whereas the credit from NBFCs has increased. And when I say credit, it is the percentage out of the total credit which is flowing to the MSME sector. Now I'll go to three very important reports which basically prove that there is a problem of credit availability in case of MSME sector. One, this year's economic survey has pointed out that until last year, out of the total credit which was flowing into the industries, only around 17% of this particular credit actually went to MSME sector. Second, as per another survey, it has been found that the credit between financial year 14 to financial year 18 to micro and small industries actually reduced from 3.1% of GDP to 2.2% of GDP. Whereas for medium sector enterprises, the credit between the same period, that is the financial year 14 to financial year 18, has reduced from 1% of GDP to 0.6% of GDP. So you can see that the credit which is going to the MSME sector has also reduced between 14 to 18. And the third, as per one of the reports which was published by RBI, it says that the credit requirement in the MSME sector is around 32 lakh crore rupees. Whereas the credit which is supplied to this particular MSME sector is much lesser than 32 lakh crore rupees. So these are the three important reports or observations which have been given by various reports which showcase that there is a huge problem with respect to credit availability in the market. Second issue is the issue of non-performing assets. Now this particular issue of NPAs troubling the banking sector is not very new. It has been there in the news cycle for very long time period now. But majority of the times these particular news cycles will only focus on the large companies which are contributing disproportionately or huge proportion to these particular NPAs. No doubt that bigger companies have contributed huge amount of NPAs to the banking sector. But having said so, the NPAs even in the MSME sector have kept on ballooning. As per the latest estimates, more than 80,000 crore worth of loans which have been given to MSME sector have become non-performing assets. And it is estimated that this is going to increase in the coming years also. And very recently, in a note which was presented by the former RBI governor, Mr. Raghuram Rajan, has stated that the targeted lending to the MSME sector is one area where the future NPAs will get generated. Because he says, whenever the government of India targets lending to the MSME sector, they will decide the targets of credit which have to be achieved by the banks. And since the banks are forced to meet these particular targets, they will usually do away with the prudent credit appraisal norms and end up giving loans even to those particular people who may not pay in the future. As a result of this, the next wave of NPAs, as per this particular note, will come from the MSME sector itself. That is the second issue. Third issue, the implementation of goods and services tax. Now with the implementation of GST, we have seen that there has been a disruption in the MSME sector on two fronts. One, the input tax credit, and second, the compliance cost. Let's understand both of them. The first one is input tax credit. What do you mean by input tax credit? Under the GST, the feature is whatever taxes I've paid on my inputs will be given in the form of credit to me when I sell the output. I'll repeat the statement. Whatever taxes I've paid on my inputs will be given in the form of a credit on the tax when I'm asked to pay on my output. Let me give an example. Let's say I've manufactured a product, but to manufacture a product I've used two raw materials, and on these two raw materials, let's say hypothetically, I've ended up paying 10 rupees input tax. Now, when I manufacture this particular product and I'm about to sell in the market, government says, pay me a tax of GST of 20 rupees. But I as a manufacturer will simply tell the government, already I've paid 10 rupees as a tax on my inputs. So this particular 10 rupees will be given as a credit when I'm selling my output. So the effective tax or the effective GST I'm going to pay will be only 10 rupees here. That is 20 rupees that is being demanded, and 10 rupees will be the credit, that is input tax credit. Effective GST I'm going to pay will be 10 rupees. So this is called as input to tax credit. Now, it has been found that the MSME sector on the first will be having a shortage of working capital, and on the second front are being asked to pay the taxes on the inputs, for which the refunds are given or the credit is given by government after a huge delay. Now, whenever the government delays providing this particular input tax credit, there will be a huge shortage which will be created on the MSME sector. As a result of this, the cost of capital for the MSME sector has kept on increasing. Because please understand, if Government of India delays giving me this particular 10 rupees, I will have to borrow the same 10 rupees in the market because I'm running short on working capital. And when I borrow this 10 rupees from the market, I will have to pay certain rate of interest on this particular 10 rupees. As a result of this, the cost of capital or the working cost has increased for the MSME sector. On the second hand, the compliance cost have kept on increasing because earlier there was no compulsion on these particular companies, especially the MSMEs, to ensure that their vendors are also on the GST, that is GST network. Now, the MSME sector has to ensure that their vendors are on the GST network. They will have to keep on filing these particular returns month after month or quarter after quarter in particular sectors. As a result of which, the compliance cost on these particular entities or the MSME units has increased. That is the precise reason the implementation of GST to a certain extent caused a disruption in the MSME sector. And please understand, the GST was implemented just after the demonetization. And the impact of demonetization was devastating on the MSME sector. So basically, because of these two back-to-back structural reforms which are implemented by Government of India, there was a disruption which was created in the MSME sector. The next issue which is plaguing this particular sector is access to market. Now let's assume I own a micro enterprise. I've produced a certain set of goods. If I want to sell these particular goods, either I'll have to sell it in the external market or I'll have to sell it in the internal market. Now the MSME sectors are suffering because they are unable to sell it in the external market because of trade wars, because of imposition of tariffs on these particular goods in the market such as, let's say, USA, because of the trade negotiations which are yet to be concluded by Government of India. So because of various reasons, the extra exports or these particular goods which are exported by these particular enterprises have suffered. On the other hand, if they want to sell it in the domestic market, these particular sales are also getting hampered for a simple reason: cheaper imports are coming from China. As a result of this, the exports as well as the domestic sales of MSME sector is getting affected. That is a problem with the access to market. Next issue is higher input cost. Very recently we have seen that rupee has depreciated. The prices of crude oil have increased, as a result of which the input cost of the MSME sector also have increased. Not to forget the increase in the prices of electric supply, the increase in compliance cost, so on and so forth. All of these are leading to what? Higher input cost. And when there are higher input cost, their sales are getting hampered, their profit margins or bottom line will also get affected. This is pushing more and more MSME units into stress. Next one is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, basically understand this, the creditors are classified under two heads: financial creditors and operational creditors. The MSME sectors are part of operational creditors. Why? In case of a financial creditor, usually it will be a bank or group of banks. We call them as financial creditors because they collect a collateral. there's a security which is collected by these particular financial institutions before they lend to a company. Whereas in case of operational creditors, these usually do not collect any collateral. Example, vendors or raw material suppliers. Majority of these MSME units supply a large quantity of raw materials to bigger companies. And when you supply these quantities or raw materials to bigger companies, you usually do not collect any collateral. And in general sense, the vendors usually don't collect any collateral. And since they do not have any kind of a collateral, these are called as operational creditors. Now the problem with IBC is that whenever a committee of creditors is set up, which will discuss and deliberate the future of this particular company, which is under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the voting power is given to only financial creditors. And the voting power is never given to operational creditors in case of India's IBC. As a result of this, how much of the money that the companies owe to this particular MSME sector will be dependent on what kind of resolution will be announced or arrived at the committee of creditors. So there is a risk of not getting the right amount of recovery. So that is another issue with implementation of IBC. And finally, the biggest problem which is not only plaguing the MSME sector but also plaguing the whole manufacturing sector in India is the lack of skilled labor availability. As per one survey that was published by Ernst & Young, it basically stated that only 2% of the labor that is present in case of India is actually skilled. Whereas Government of India claims that more than 10% of labor in case of India is skilled. But nevertheless, the point is that majority of the labor that is available in case of India is unskilled. And this is also hampering not only the MSME sector but also the bigger companies. But please understand this, the bigger companies to a certain extent can overcome this particular problem either by getting latest technology or skilling the labor at their expense or providing on-the-job skill, so on and so forth. The same kind of financial power is not available to the MSME sector. So that is another issue which has been plaguing the MSME sector. So these are some of the issues. Now let's have a look at some of the very important reforms that have been announced by Government of India to resolve some of these particular issues which are plaguing MSME. One is CGT MSE, which stands for Credit Guarantee Fund Trust for Micro and Small Enterprises. I'll repeat it. Credit Guarantee Trust for Micro and Small Enterprises. What is the objective of this particular fund? This particular fund was established by Government of India in the year 2000. The objective of this particular fund is to ensure that there will be credit guarantee provided in case the borrower defaults on the repayment. I'll repeat it. The objective of this particular fund is to provide credit guarantee in case a borrower who is a micro and small enterprise defaults on the repayment. Now, how much of the credit guarantee will be provided will vary from one sector to another sector, from 1% to another percentage of the amount remaining. But essentially, the credit guarantee simply means, let's say hypothetically, I've borrowed 100 rupees from a bank. I'm a micro enterprise. And out of this 100 rupees, let's say after paying 30 rupees, I've defaulted on 70 rupees. Now, the credit guarantee trust fund will ensure that out of this 70 rupees, it will provide some of it in the form of a recovery or credit guarantee to this particular bank. How much will be provided? It varies from one fund to or one sector to another sector, one kind of a loan to another kind of a loan. But essentially, the objective is to promote more and more credit flow to the MSME sector. Second one is Public Procurement Policy. PPP here means Public Procurement Policy. This was introduced by Government of India back in the year 2012. Under this particular Public Procurement Policy, the objective simply is to ensure that the central government, the ministries or departments or central public sector enterprises the 20% of their requirement will be sourced from the micro and small enterprises. I'll repeat it. 20% of their requirement either by central government, the ministries or the departments under the central government, or even for that matter, the central public sector enterprises. 20% of their requirement will be sourced from micro and small enterprises. The objective of this is to ensure that there is availability of a market for these particular products which are produced by the MSME sector. Let's say hypothetically, the government of India, through one of its central public sector enterprises, is building, let's say, an bridge. To construct this particular bridge, 20% of let's say raw materials or 20% of machines, whatever it is, 20% requirements will be sourced from micro and small enterprises. This is called as a public procurement policy. Third one is Mudra, Micro Units Development and Refinance Agency, under which Government of India has proposed three types of a loan: Shishu, Kishore and Tarun, and these particular loans will span from 50,000 rupees to 10 lakh rupees, and these particular loans will be given to micro enterprises. Again, the objective of this particular scheme is to ensure there is a sufficient financial availability or credit availability for micro enterprises. Next one is priority sector lending, which has been implemented by RBI in all the banks in India. Under the priority sector lending, RBI mandates that 40% of their credit flow or the total loans issued in 1 year have to go to some of these particular sectors. These sectors are agriculture, housing loans, export credit, so on and so forth. And some of this, that is out of 40%, will also be going to the micro enterprises. That is, RBI has mandated that 7.5% of this particular 40% has to go to the micro enterprise. Not only that, if the loans are issued by the banking sector up to a certain limit, these loans can even be classified under the priority sector lending. The only difference between this provision and the other provision that I'm speaking of is that this is only applicable to micro enterprises, whereas the latter provision is applicable to all the MSME units. Very recently, Government of India has announced that the corporate tax for all those enterprises which are making a revenue of up to 250 crore rupees will be reduced to 25%, which was earlier 30%. This particular reduction in the corporate tax from 30% to 25% is going to benefit the MSME sector, because majority of the MSMEs will be able to meet this particular criteria, as a result of which they will end up paying lesser corporate tax to Government of India. And finally, the Government of India very recently has announced an MSME amendment bill, which is going to amend the MSME Act and change the definition for MSME, which I've already mentioned in the previous slide. So these are some of the important reforms which have been announced by Government of India and which will have a huge impact on the MSME sector. Now let's have a look at the 12 initiatives which have been announced by Government of India to promote accessibility to credit, accessibility to market, ease of doing business, to provide certain security benefits to MSME employees, so on and so forth. The first reform which was announced was the biggest one, 59-minute loan portal. The Government of India has said that SIDBI has launched a new portal under which you can get in principle approval. Please understand, I am using the term in principle approval, which simply means if you are a MSME unit which has got itself registered under GST, that is GST network, as well as is paying GST, has got annual IT returns, then you can apply for a loan from a value 10 lakh rupees to 1 crore rupees. And the in-principle approval will be given to you within 59 minutes. There is a process which has been prescribed by Government of India. If you follow the process, the government says before you can even reach your office from your home, the in-principle approval for the loan will be granted. Now please understand, there is a huge difference between giving in-principle approval than giving the loan itself. In-principle approval simply means the banker or the financial institution just has agreed to give you loan, hasn't issued a loan, has agreed to give you loan. That is the simple meaning of in principle approval. So the government says to curb the issue of credit availability in the market for the MSME sector, the 59-minute loan portal will be available. And those assessees or the MSME sectors which are on the GST network have got IT returns, can easily file for the loans or apply for the loans, and the in principle approval will be given within 59 minutes. This is a very important reform because please understand, in the last couple of months, there has been a huge shortage of credit availability in the market, which has been much more acute because of issues of credit availability in the NBFC sector. And if the estimates are to go by, this particular acuteness or the shortage of credit availability will further increase with more defaults by IL&FS. And whenever the credit availability becomes very difficult, the borrowing will also be very difficult for the MSME sector. And as already mentioned, the MSME sector suffers from shortage of working capital. This particular reform will go long way to promote or to ensure that there is sufficient credit availability in the MSME sector. That is the first reform. Second reform, 2% interest subvention. Now please understand, the government will use different terminologies, subvention, rebate, so on and so forth. But essentially these particular terms simply means exemption or reduction. So 2% interest subvention for all GST registered MSMEs. It simply means if an MSME takes a loan at a rate of interest of, let's say, 10%, the government says the effective rate of interest will fall down to 8%. What about the remaining 2%? The remaining 2% usually is incurred or given by Government of India. So this is called as a 2% interest subvention for all GST registered MSMEs. The objectives that the Government of India is aiming to achieve through this particular reform is one, promote formalization. Even through the first one, they are trying to promote formalization. Why? Please understand, if I am a micro enterprise who was not earlier registered under the GST network, looking at these particular reforms, I'll be prompted to get registered under the GST, which will promote formalization of these particular informal sectors. Because as per various reports, around 97% of the MSME units are informal in nature. So by giving these particular reforms, the government is not only promoting liquidity into the sector, it is also promoting formalization of informal MSME units, which will contribute to GST collection, which will contribute to corporate taxes collection, which will contribute to generation of employment, so on and so forth. So 2% interest subvention will promote formalization as well as availability of a credit at cheaper rate of interest. So this is the objective of this particular reform. Now Government of India has said 2% interest subvention for all GST registered MSMEs as well as the rate of interest rebate for MSME exporters. I'll repeat the statement. The rate of interest rebate for MSME exporters will increase from 3% to 5%. What is the meaning of this? The exporters will usually seek credit, which is called as export credit. In case of India, the export creditor is available at a higher rate of interest compared to the rate of interest charged for export credit in various developed countries. On an average, it is estimated that the export credit in China as well as the major exporting countries is in the range of 6% to 8%. Whereas in case of India, it is more than 8%. By increasing the subvention or the rebate from 3% to 5%, which again simply means exemption or reduction of rate of interest, the Government of India is ensuring that there is a huge availability of export credit at a cheaper rate of interest. This will play a very important role in promoting more and more exports from India. So this is the second reform. Third one, companies with a turnover of more than 500 crore rupees must compulsorily come on TREDS. That is a trade receivables e-discounting system. Now let's try and understand what is TREDS. The problem with respect to MSME units is, let's assume here is a micro enterprise. It will sell certain raw material worth, let's say, 5 lakh rupees to a company. And this particular company will tell this particular micro enterprise to collect this particular 5 lakh rupees after 3 months, which is usually done in case of all the sectors. This is called as a credit cycle. But the problem with this micro enterprise is that it doesn't have sufficient capital. It is going to receive 5 lakh rupees, but not today, but after 3 months. So this will lead to acute shortage of working capital, which will put a huge stress on this particular micro enterprise. Now under trade system, what can be done is, this particular micro enterprise may simply sell this particular receivable. I'm using the term receivable. What is receivable here? 5 lakh rupees. The receivable receipt can be sold or can be traded by this particular micro enterprise to a financier, which is majorly a bank or any other financial institution. The process is, this particular micro enterprise will list out this particular receipt on this particular online platform. Various financial institutions will start bidding for this particular receivable, and one financial institution which quotes the lowest discounting rate will enter into an agreement with this particular micro enterprise. In simple terms, the process is that this micro enterprise says, pay me the amount today and you will receive this particular 5 lakh rupees from this company after 3 months. I'll repeat the statement. Once the agreement is entered into, this financial institution will give the discounted amount to this particular enterprise, micro enterprise, today itself, and will receive 5 lakh rupees from the company after 3 months. In simple terms, the receivables can be traded off to get the money today itself for a micro enterprise, which will provide liquidity for this particular micro enterprise, and this enterprise need not go to market to borrow money. This will reduce the financial pressure or the capital adequacy pressure on this particular micro enterprise. So this particular system is called as trades. RBI has given licenses for 3 entities to have a platform of trades, which are functioning very well in case of India. And the government of India now says all those companies which have got a turnover of more than 500 crore rupees compulsorily must come under trades. This will promote more and more trading as well as the market for these particular receivables or the receipts in the market, thereby promoting liquidity for the MSME sector. The next reform is that all the public sector enterprises under the central government must come under the GEM. GEM stands for Government E-Marketplace. The object of a GEM is that, let's say here is a ministry or here is a central public sector enterprise. They want to purchase certain machineries or certain raw materials. Under the GEM, there will be a list of vendors or suppliers who will quote the prices or they will put the tenders in an online platform. And the ministry or the central public sector enterprise will choose these particular vendors from this particular online platform. This online platform is called as Government E-Marketplace. The objective of a GEM is to ensure the faster process of allocation as well as the purchase of these raw materials, transparency in the process of the purchases. Hence, GEM is one of the initiatives of Government of India which they have introduced under the concept of lesser government, more governance. So when Government of India says all the public sector enterprises which are functioning under the central government must come under the GEM platform, it simply means the micro, small and medium enterprises have to get registered as vendors. Already many of them are working as vendors under the GEM, and there will be a huge availability of a market to sell their producers in this particular platform. So this is the fourth reform. Next one, earlier under the public procurement policy, the Government of India had mandated procurement of up to 20% of their total purchases from MSMEs. But now this has been increased from 20% to 25%. Now this will promote the access to market for the MSME sector. Not only this, within this particular 25% procurement which are to be done by the central government, 3% of this particular procurement will be done by the MSME units which are owned by women entrepreneurs. So this is the sixth reform. The remaining reforms are 7. Random allocation for inspections or visits. Earlier there was a term called as inspection rush, which simply means these inspectors will go to these particular factories and ask for various records which usually are not maintained by these particular companies or units. This will lead to opaqueness in bureaucracy as well as practices of corruption, as a result of which we use the term inspection rush. Now the government of India says, rather than inspector choosing to visit these particular units, a computerized system randomly will allocate these particular inspections or visits to any of these inspectors. So that the inspector, rather than choosing a company, the system will tell which company to visit. This, to a very great extent, will reduce these particular corruption practices. And not only this, government says once the inspector visits the company or the unit, within the next 48 hours, he has to submit the report online. That is the 7th reform. Next, various returns under 8 labor laws henceforth have to be filed once in a year. Earlier, the companies or the units were supposed to file them twice in a year. This, to a very great extent, will promote ease of doing business. Next, rather than having different licenses under the Prevention of Air Pollution Act as well as the Prevention of Water Pollution Act, henceforth there is only a single license which will be issued. The government of India has also announced that they will be amending the Companies Act, under which around 16 offences out of 81 offences, which were earlier referred to as a compoundable offences, will be reclassified as a minor offences. And now, rather than the owner of these MSME unit going to a court and facing this particular situation, has to simply rectify these particular minor offences through self-certification. This will promote, again, ease of doing business. Next, the Government of India has also announced establishing pharma MSMEs. The pharma sector is one of the sectors which is growing at a rapid pace in India. Hence, Government of India aims to promote this particular sector. And apart from this, Government of India has also announced setting up of tool rooms under the concept of hub and spoke model. For this, Government of India has set up or set aside around 6,000 crore rupees. The tool rooms will ensure the latest equipments or latest technological tools are available for this particular MSME sector. So these are the reforms, 12 reforms which have been announced by Government of India. Apart from this, the Government of India has also announced that a new Yojana on the lines of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana will be launched to provide social security benefits for the employees who are working under the MSME sector. So these are the reforms announced by the government. So let's have a look at the evaluation of these particular reforms. 1. These reforms do not address the structural issues which are plaguing the MSME sector. For example, infrastructure bottlenecks. In case of India, it is said that the transportation cost account for 14% of GDP, which is much higher than the average of 6 to 8% in developed countries. So these particular reforms do not address the infrastructure bottlenecks such as transportation, electricity, the increasing cost of imports, rupee depreciation, which is again affecting the increased cost of imports, and the input cost increase. So these reforms do not address these issues. Next, this is not the first time that the Government of India has announced a package for the MSME sector. Even the earlier governments have done or have announced a huge amount of reforms. But so far, the reforms announcement is one part of it. Implementation is the most important key. As per various experts, there is no dearth of good announcements in India or good policies in India, but there's definitely a dearth of good implementation. So, announcement is one part of the promotion of MSME sector, but the most important part will be how these particular reforms will be implemented. For example, it looks very good on paper when the Government of India says in principle approval will be given for a loan up to 1 crore rupees. But please understand, if a bank wants to give an approval or in principle approval for a loan, it has to conduct a credit appraisal mechanism. On what basis the credit appraisal mechanism will be conducted within just 59 minutes? That is one of the concerns which have been raised by various experts with respect to these kind of reforms. Next, targeted lending is always fraught with various risks. As earlier mentioned, Mr. Raghuram Rajan has stated that the targeted lending to this particular sector, especially to MSME under the Mudra Yojana, will always lead to the increase in NPAs in the future, because the banks, to meet these particular targets, will usually violate the norms which they usually follow while allocation of loans, because they want to achieve the targets now. And whenever the targeted lending is done, this might lead to a huge wave of non-performing assets in the coming years. Next, are we putting a huge undue pressure on the banking sector? Because on one side, Government of India says within 59 minutes, I'll give you an in-principle approval on a loan of up to 1 crore rupees. And if you go to the portal and see which of the banks are signed up for this particular 59-minute loan approval, most of them are public sector banks. Already we have seen a huge pressure on the public sector banks because of a higher NPS. Now, are we pushing these particular public sector banks again into more problems in the future by giving hurried approvals for loans up to 1 crore rupees? So this is another concern with respect to these particular reforms. But most importantly, some of the experts have stated that these reforms do not address why majority of the MSME sector prefer to remain informal rather than becoming part of the formal sector. So these are some of the concerns or the evaluation with respect to these particular reforms. But having said so, we will have to congratulate the Government of India for taking the first step towards reducing the stress on the MSME sector. There is no denying the fact that the MSME sector came under large pressure because of back-to-back structural reforms of demonetization as well as GST. Now, the Government of India, for whatever objective, has introduced these particular reforms. These reforms are not the last set of reforms, but are just the beginning of the reforms in the MSME sector. So, these reforms will not yield results overnight. We will have to wait for a certain period of time, then evaluate these particular reforms, whatever the outcome might be. These reforms, no doubt, will lead to formalization of the MSME sector. As already mentioned, how the Government of India is targeting formalization. This is the right step towards the strengthening the MSME sector, which has been disrupted because of various reforms. And finally, the recommendation to Government of India is that though these reforms are a good starting point to promote or to revive the MSME sector, these reforms are not sufficient. The Government of India has to ensure all the other bottlenecks are taken care of, such as transportation infrastructure, the availability of skilled labor, so on and so forth. And more importantly, the Government of India has to start looking at entering into more bilateral as well as multilateral agreements, which will provide more market accessibility to the MSME exports. So this is the total discussion over this particular announcement of the reforms. Have a good day. Thank you.